Hello, welcome to This Week on Mustard TV. Just in case you hadn't noticed, there's been something rather important going on this last week, and like it or not, you're going to hear a lot more about it over the next 4 months. On June the 23rd, we're all going to have to decide how to vote in the EU referendum, and the decision the country makes then will shape our future. So even if you're sick of the political wrangling, what we decide then will really matter. So tonight we're going to try and unpick some of the pros and cons with Simon Tobin, who's the UKIP's candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner in Suffolk. Also with us, Dr. Nick Wright, who teaches EU politics at UCL, and Simon Wright, who's the former Lib Dem MP for Norwich South. We'll hear from my guests in a moment. But first, David Cameron came back from Brussels at the weekend with a deal which he says gives Britain special status in the EU.
I believe we'll be safer in a reformed Europe because we can work with our European partners to fight cross-border crime and terrorism. I believe Britain will be stronger in a reformed Europe because we can play a leading role in one of the world's largest organisations from within, helping to make the big decisions on trade and security that determine our future. And I believe we'll be better off in a reformed Europe because British businesses will have full access to the free trade single market, bringing jobs, investment and lower prices. Let me be clear, leaving Europe would threaten our economic and our national security. Those who want to leave Europe cannot tell you if British businesses will be able to access Europe's free trade single market, or if working people's jobs are safe, or how much prices would rise. All they're offering is a risk at a time of uncertainty, a leap in the dark.
So let's talk about some of those issues. Simon Tobin, I'll start with you. David Cameron talked about being stronger and safer in Europe. That's going to reassure people, isn't it?
Well, stronger and safer. Well, that's the question. We were stronger and safer in 1975 and beyond. We ran our country for obviously thousands of years and the Union for 300 years. What happened in 75 is, of course, we joined as 9 nations together as a trading bloc, but this has morphed into virtually a state now, which is controlling our country. We are not safer because we are members of NATO, therefore that has kept our security, and stronger. With ourselves trading as ourselves as the 5th biggest economy in the world, we will be stronger out of the EU.
Let's come to Simon Wright. I know you're pretty pro-Europe. Stronger and safer in. Is that what people need to focus on?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, we are stronger when we work in a union with our neighbours, reach shared agreements so that we can trade more effectively, create opportunities for trade, for jobs that comes from that, and for inward investment too, but also through cooperation on issues of security, on issues of foreign policy. And, you know, the one person who would feel safer if with a Brexit would be Putin. Actually, he's the one who's looking at this with great interest, and I think that having one voice with the rest of Europe on foreign issues, but also being able to work on cooperation on issues such as environment and social policy, gives us very powerful opportunities that we simply wouldn't have if we were out. So safer and stronger, yes.
Dr. Nick Wright, same question, two very different answers. It's hard for the public to know what to think, isn't it?
It is, and there's the surfeit of opinion and the surfeit of fact on these particular points, and you know there's validity in both sides of the argument. I think the key question though is how do we deal with the uncertainty? And the reality is, it would be very uncertain if we withdrew from the European Union. Yes, everything might be fine. We might get a great renegotiation. We might have a great trading relationship. My personal view is that the evidence suggests it would be very, very complex to achieve that, and very difficult. Whether or not we would, at the end of that process, be better off than we were when we were in, I'm not so sure.
People want some reassurance, don't they, Simon Tobin? And it is an uncertain situation. Well,
what we're worried about is the sellability of jumping into the unknown. Jumping into the unknown of what? UK has stood, as I said, continually over the years on its own. It trades fantastically right across the country. I'm just doing some business at the moment with a Chinese company, and just through interest I checked up on the Chinese facts. China trades with the EU for £368 billion a year. Of course they're not members of the EU. If we're outside the EU, we will trade very, very well with, and a lot of people are misunderstanding the point, we're not leaving Europe, We want to leave the EU mechanism that is throttling our well-being for the future. We love Europe, we want to trade with them, we're not leaving Europe. We're leaving this mechanism, would like to leave this mechanism.
Let's ask Simon, is it throttling UK business?
No, it's empowering for UK business, and almost half of our exports are linked within the European Union. Now, of course, if we were to leave tomorrow, that's not to say that all those exports would stop, but we would have the uncertainty of what trade agreement we would have with the European Union and what levels of trade and investment that would lead to, and what that would do for jobs too. Now, at the moment, government figures suggest around 3 million jobs are linked to our trade within the European Union as a member. Because of that uncertainty of what would happen if we were to leave, we don't actually know how many of those jobs would be lost and how many would be retained under a post-EU Britain.
You're nodding, Nick. What do you want to add about jobs?
It's a very difficult one because, again, we simply don't know. We trade with China. We have a strong trading relationship with China. Germany has a stronger one. Whether or not our appeal as a trading partner would be the same outside the EU for a country like China, I don't know. Again, they look at us. We're often presented as a gateway to the European Union, a gateway to the single market. That's part of our appeal. We've always been a very outward-looking trading nation, and so when you start playing with that, when you start affecting the components of that, it becomes very difficult to predict what will happen.
Okay, so let's think about what are some of the key things that people need to know when they're making that decision. What are the key things that people need to think about for you, Simon Tobin?
As a trading country, Mercedes motor cars, for an example, imported into the UK 144,000 cars last year, 40,000 more than the previous year. Volkswagen, fourth biggest importer into the UK. They need us more than we need them, and that's not us being arrogant because we need them. But the point I'm making is we mustn't worry that we come out and that suddenly our economy goes through the floor. London is the central trading city of the world. We've got every opportunity to further increase, work with countries on a one-to-one rather than having a single voice for us held within the EU on the World Trade Organization.
Respond to that, Simon. What do you think?
The car industry is one of the areas that I would be concerned about if we were to leave the EU. Both Honda and Nissan have raised their concerns about what the investment in their businesses would mean for the UK if we were to leave the European Union. I do think that actually we are more dependent on the EU than the EU is on us when it comes to trade. As I say, nearly half of our exports to the EU, whereas less than 10% of the EU's exports are to the UK. So actually there is a very strong balance and a very strong argument for investors in exporting in the UK to support our position in the European Union, and that's why Honda and Nissan and car manufacturers have raised these concerns. What
do we know about what it might mean for jobs? Do we have any idea what would happen to the employment market if we were to come out?
Again, it depends which sector you look at. For some would say, well, it will create more opportunities in certain sectors than others. I think the point here for me is that it's not so much a point of one side benefiting from pulling out and the other side. Both sides will be damaged if the UK economy is not contributing and part of sort of the wider European economy, and that's the problem. It will weaken both sides, it will diminish both sides, and given that we live in a much more globalised and incredibly competitive international market, that's problematic.
Okay, well, we know that not everyone in the Conservative Party agrees with David Cameron that staying in Europe is the best thing for Britain, and we'll hear more about the local MPs' views later in the programme, but perhaps one of the most high-profile supporters of the Leave campaign is the London Mayor, Boris Johnson.
I don't think anybody could realistically claim that this is fundamental reform of the EU or of Britain's relationships with the EU. And it's my view that after 30 years of writing about this, we have a chance actually to do something. I have a chance actually to do something. I would like to see a new relationship based more on trade, on cooperation, but as I say, with much less of this supranational element. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I've decided, after a huge amount of heartache, because I did not want to do anything. The last thing I wanted was to go against David Cameron or the government. But after a great deal of heartache, I don't think there's anything else I can do. I will be advocating vote Leave. or whatever the team is called. I understand there are many of them. I think that is basically because I want a better deal for the people of this country.
Boris Johnson in his typical style. Do you think having a big name in the Leave campaign helps them, or do people not really mind who it is?
I think it's bigger than Boris. I think the big risk. I don't know if my two colleagues here would agree with me, but I think the big risk here is it becomes focused on personalities. And the really important thing about this referendum is actually this is a fundamental decision that we all face. But whatever view you have. This is probably the only chance we're going to get in our lives to vote on this, and so we've got to look beyond personality.
And some of the things that people are worried about, coming back to that, is benefits, and David Cameron has secured some changes on benefits, hasn't he? Yeah,
they're fairly modest reforms in truth. I mean, actually many Europeans that come to this country do not actually make use of the benefit system for in-work benefits anyway. I think it's something like 1 in 5 Eastern Europeans who come to the UK claim in-work benefits, so it's not a very significant amount that we're talking about. I do think that Nick is absolutely right. We do need to focus on the issues rather than the personalities. I think Boris has possibly looked in different directions on the issue of Europe over the years, which hasn't helped his credibility on the matter and perhaps doesn't actually help the Leave campaign ultimately.
A quick word on benefits before we stop for the break.
Benefits, it's intriguing to know now that an eighth of the population are born abroad now in the UK out of the population, and I want to get this clear from a UKIP point of view. We're completely open and enjoy immigration. It's good for Britain, but it's controllability. That's the big issue. It's zero controls. 1,000 people, came into the UK last year, and talking about jobs and wage suppression, it's pulling down the working man of all race, creed, who are here.
Okay, all right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Stay with us after the break. We'll be talking more about the EU to try and help you decide how to vote in June. Hello, welcome back. Tonight we're trying to unpick some of that political argument around Europe and understand the key issues which will help you decide how to vote in the referendum in June. With me to talk about this is Simon Tobin from UKIP. Also here, politics expert Dr Nick Wright and former Norwich South MP Simon Wright. We'll hear from my guests in a moment. But first, Neil Perry's been looking at how Norfolk MPs are planning to campaign in this referendum.
Yes, it's going to be the big talking point from now until the referendum in the summer. In or out. But what have our MPs been saying about this whole debate? Well, as you can see, most of them say they do want to remain in the EU. It's just 2. In South Norfolk, Richard Bacon, and in North West Norfolk, Henry Bellingham, saying they want to leave. So let's see in detail what they've all been saying. Let's start in Norwich. Norwich South's Labour MP Clive Lewis wants to stay in, saying Europe means millions of jobs and is the only way to get things done on the really big issues. Norwich North's Tory Chloe Smith admits she is sceptical about the EU but isn't convinced there's any better option in leaving. Broadland's Keith Simpson thinks that overall we are better off in than out when it comes to the economy and to our security. Yarmouth's Brandon Lewis is saying he's in too, pointing out all the links between the East Coast energy industry and with Europe. There's also support from Tory Liz Truss in South West, George Freeman in Mid Norfolk, Peter Aldness in Waveney, and up in North Norfolk, Lib Dem Norman Lamb. Now, after initially being publicly undecided, North West Norfolk's Tory Henry Bellingham says he is going to vote to leave, saying the decision is, though, with a heavy heart, but his main concern is over immigration. And South Norfolk's Richard Bacon, as I said, is also planning to vote out. He's concerned about our ability to make our own laws, set our own taxes and control our borders. So, there you have it. That's what they think. But what do you think? Just 17 weeks left to make your mind up.
Neil Perry reporting there. So Simon Wright, you used to be an MP. How important is that, and what they think in this campaign?
Well, I think it's fairly important, but I think that really this is a debate that the whole of the public needs to engage with, and we need to see all aspects of society really talking about Europe, coming to terms with the issues that there are to be discussed, and to really look into the facts of the issues that are there. So the politicians will have some sway, but I don't think it will be politicians alone. I think people will also want to hear from those who are investing in jobs. They'll want to hear from the local media as well, and their analysis of the circumstances as they are, and they will want to know from other aspects of society that are affected, whether it's those who work in the environmental spheres, where cooperation across the European Union is so important, or whether it's those working in social policy. So it's not just politicians by any means, and perhaps the more powerful advocates come from outside politics.
And how do we keep people interested? Because I've had people say to me already, oh, I'm fed up of it, I've had enough, and it's only just begun.
It's a very good question. I mean, I think the risk of this is that it's the Euro enthusiasts and the Europhobes are kind of people at either end of the spectrum who are kind of who shout loudest throughout this campaign, and it puts people off. And I think that's the big problem. I think it's around about 35-36% of people are undecided. And what's important is that they engage with this rather than saying, I don't care.
Is there a danger that we put people off by shouting too much to come out?
It is. Well, I think I would put it this way. I'm actually being balanced on my reply. Both campaigns need to do a lot more to make sure that the man and woman on the street fully understands the implications, because we feel quite strongly that they don't. We do a lot of straw polling, so to speak, with groups of people on the ground in the Suffolk area, and some people are saying, well, I don't really quite understand it. The big concern for us is that the younger generation, so to speak, and I say younger, 35 years old, etc., have never been out of the EU. They're worried, and they're getting sold, if we get out, everything's going to implode. The point that we're making is we joined this as a trading bloc, and then over the years it's become almost a super state. I was in Brussels 3 months ago, and it's absolutely frightening. A federal police, federal army, more 75% of our votes, etc., are being done, which implicates our laws in the UK. So the point is, the man and woman of the street of Great Britain, please seriously have a look at what we've got. I think just to kind of to come back on some of that, I think the reality is that, yeah, there are sort of federalists within Europe, absolutely, but that's just one perspective, and I would be amazed to find support across 28 member states for any kind of European army, for example. Also, in terms of the amount of legislation that is being made that actually sort of made in Brussels that directly affects the UK. And the House of Commons itself reported it was like 13-14% between 1993 and 2014, which is significant, focuses largely on the single market. But there's a lot of other areas where where our Parliament is working. So I think Simon's absolutely right. It is about giving facts to people on the street and being aware of what may or may not put them off. But it's much more complex. Well,
let's hear from some of the people who watch the show. You've been getting in touch on social media, as always, leaving your questions for the panel. Phil Bygrave asks, I don't understand what's involved with being in the EU. So can I ask, what are the implications if we left? Simon Wright, what do you think the implications?
Jobs and investment. That is the main issue of concern that I would have if we were to move away from the European Union. At the moment, we've got certainty, more or less. Our projections for economic growth in this country are projected on the basis that we remain an important trading part within the European Union, and it would be the uncertainty that would affect inward investment and jobs, which for me is the main issue under consideration.
Briefly, other implications?
I think there's a significant risk to the integrity of the United Kingdom whether or not Scotland will remain, and potentially there'll be an effect on Northern Ireland as well.
And the implications for you?
Very quickly, when we joined as 9 member states, the European Common Market controlled 63% of the sort of trade in the world. It's now gone to 35%. Why? Because we've watered it down from 9 now to 28, well 27 other states barring us. The point we're making is this is now just becoming a super state. There's only 3.
But what would happen if we left?
If we left, we would be able to operate our own business completely unshackled and drive forward. We're a very entrepreneurial and dynamic country.
Just allow someone to respond briefly before we move on.
I mean,
Go on.
I was going to say, absolutely, Sam's right. We are a very entrepreneurial and dynamic country, but the idea that we can operate, entirely independently of the European Union, I just don't think that's reality. Whatever the trade agreement we come up with afterwards, that's going to have an impact on how much freedom of manoeuvre we actually have. So I think we've got to be clear about that.
Okay. Paul Stevens says, I would love to know when we can expect facts, not opinions. And this is part of the problem, isn't it? Yeah. Everybody's got an opinion.
What we're doing, and I would imagine also the other campaign with great respect to them, is we're getting some serious bullet points, and we're doing quite a lot of research, and over the next week to 2 weeks the Out campaign are going to do this, and it's a cross-party. I don't know, gentlemen, if you'd agree with me or not, but this shouldn't be party-driven. This should, as you were saying, it's got to be for the different people who feel, and for the people of Great Britain. This has got to be very neutral, and the facts need to be there.
Is there an issue about trust? Who can we trust to tell us the truth on this issue?
I think there is, and that's why we need a wide range of stakeholders engaging in this debate, why it shouldn't just be politicians talking about this. I think that, politicians will, of course, have very strong views on these issues, but it's really important that in talking about the facts that we can distinguish where fact is and where opinion is. And sometimes when that's coming from a biased source, it is very difficult to draw that distinction. So I can sit here and very clearly say to you that one fact is that nearly half of our exports are within the European Union. From that, I then project that there may be a certain number of jobs lost if we no longer were a member of the European Union. But that's when fact starts to move into the sphere of opinion, and drawing that distinction is very difficult.
Okay, Derek Wood says, I've worked with EU countries for 50 years this April. It would be a disaster for our trade if we left. He disagrees with you.
We pay £55 million a day to be a member every day, 365 days. I'll give you a quick example. We've required a bridge in Lowestoft for the last 50 years. That's going to cost 100 million quid. It's been just talked about for 50 years. That's 2 days membership of the EU. We will be able to invest this great money that our country turns over for the good of our people, of all race, nationality. People don't understand. They think we finish, everything folds up. It will be the start of good things.
Well, we're almost out of time. I want to talk about what are going to be the main issues that will decide it for us. Let's start with Simon Wright. What are the main issues do you think?
I'll come back to jobs. I simply think that is going to be the most important issue at the end of the day. Which decision leads to this country being able to create the jobs that we need for our future prosperity?
Okay, what do you think will be the key issue that will decide it for people?
I think it's going to be the economy, and I think it's going to be fears about immigration and managing that particular challenge.
Okay, Simon, tell me what
immigration, border controls.
Okay, so we have a referendum, 23rd of June. How is it going to work before we finish briefly, Nick Wright? Will it be 50% of the vote plus one?
Well, I was looking through the legislation this morning, as one does, and there's nothing clear about it. I mean, I think it will be 50% of the turnout plus one. The problem then is if the turnout is less than 50%, at what point does that result lose legitimacy? If 20% of the population vote to stay in and 10% of the population vote to leave, does that count as a legitimate outcome?
Yeah, it's all going to be very interesting. We will continue our discussions over the next few months, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again. That is all we've got time for this evening, though. If you would like to get in touch, we're on Facebook or on Twitter @MustardThisWeek. Good night.